Am I trying to make you more empathetic? No. Be as mean and as thoughtless as you want to be. Go get I didn't mean it like that tattooed on your forehead, since that's your mantra. But with that, also be reminded that you're supposed to treat people how you want to be treated. So should you ever find yourself wrestling with something for which you would not want to be mocked, you would be hard-pressed to find the same empathy you were hard-pressed to extend. Also, when you're being mean or just making an off-color joke at someone else's expense, with these tidbits of knowledge, you can never say you didn't know. At the point you choose to be, do, or say, you're doing it by choice, not by unawareness. Let your character speak its truth. Passionate. Let me tell you something.
So what is this Passion PSA podcast? Who am I? Well, they call me Passion, short for passion, no last necessary. Why is there no last name necessary? Because the first name says it all. I am Passion and all that embodies. What do I do here? I give you the life coaching that you know you need, but don't enroll yourself in. When did I start? Actually, 2017. I'd leave a PSA on my Instagram regarding something I'd observed, and now we've evolved to this. Why do I do it? Why not? If even one person is able to take away one thing that changes their life, someone else's life, or changes the world for the better, then I've done what I was charged to do. So come on in, sit and listen for a while. There's something here for everyone at the Passion PSA podcast.
Greetings and salutations, my beloved passionates, newcomers, visitors, and guests. Welcome to another episode of the Passion PSA podcast, where I, Passion No Last Necessary, your Get You Right Guru, issue a weekly public service announcement about whatever I've observed or was on my mind. This is a for your consideration zone where the objective is to offer you a perspective you may not have previously considered to A, expand your thinking, and B, aid you in becoming a better version of yourself for yourself and for others. This is a safe space, but not necessarily a delicate one. I'll never rob you of your right to feel what you feel, the same way I won't sugarcoat whatever it is that I have to say. The goal is to get you to higher, more expanded thinking so you can operate as your highest and best self. If you are new here, affirmations are our first order of business so we can intentionally raise the vibration and start on one accord. So let's get on the same frequency. If you're ready, go ahead and take a deep breath. You are always welcome to repeat after me or to use this time to state your own affirmations. Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art, how great thou art. I use words wisely. I use words intentionally. I say what I mean what I say. I speak positively about myself. I speak positively about others. I speak life. I live life. I have life abundantly. Gratitude that it is well. Gratitude that I am well. Gratitude that all is well. Well is all. Ashe, ashe, ashe. Passion, did you ever be so comfortable and confident in saying something and then you just like have a moment of conviction? So I was sitting at my desk at work reflecting on a conversation that I was having with a coworker, and I said to her that I was struggling during the shift and I was at my desk dope fiend nodding. And the statement was true. Like, if you've ever had the experience to watch a heroin user when they're high, you know that they not off anywhere. I can remember years ago waiting with an employee. We were either trying to cross the street or we were trying to catch a cab. But we were still on a sidewalk, and there was a man a few steps ahead of us standing in the street where he just stopped and nodded off in the midst of oncoming traffic on Canal Street. Now, if you've ever been to Canal Street, you know how chaotic this looks. So now my employee, she was young. She was like a freshman in high school or something like that. She wasn't from the area. And based on her reaction, she'd never seen anything like this before. So she was perplexed. Her innocence was so sweet. She was like, what is he doing? Why did he just stop like that? And I just casually said, well, that's a dope fiend now. He's high and he's nodding off. And she was like, but he's in the middle of the street. And I was like, well, that's why he need to stay off that shit's naive. Point of that story time, dope fiend nod is not an expression that I coined. And it's not a fabricated explanation or description of what the observer sees after the heroin user has used. We've seen them nod from standing at full attention all the way down to their ankles, hold it like a mannequin or a statue, and then stand back up and keep going like nothing happened. Somebody listening or watching has seen it and is right now years old finding out what they witnessed. Fast forward back to the moment I started composing this, I'm sitting at my desk thinking about how easily that statement came to me, how easily it rolled off my tongue, how little I thought of saying it. I didn't think anything of it at all, like ever, like until January or February of 2024. But in that moment, I thought about the fact that I have friends who had or have parents that were or are drug addicts. I know people who've lived with and loved people, heavy emphasis on the fact that they are indeed people, right? People who've lived with and loved people that we so easily and readily reduce to their affliction. And as I went back to edit, I'm like, I've had friends who were substance abusers. I'm people who have loved people with these kinds of afflictions. It makes the message more stringent. Alkies, dope fiends, coke heads, crack heads, meth heads, bass head, tweaker, junkies, druggies, hop heads. I didn't know that last one was even a thing until I did a Google search for slang for substance abusers. AddictionCenter.com opened my eyes. I didn't know there were so many different names and what drugs they were associated with until I did this search. It's crazy. And we casually throw these names, these titles, slurs, epithets around, and we laugh. Sometimes we laugh because of the outrageous things they do or say, while not necessarily under the influence, but under the impact. Sometimes we laugh at the toll the substance has taken on their appearance, and we liken our bad behavior to their behavior in jest. And we never stop to think of how someone could be feeling about our mockery. And it's true. Folks do need to get off that shit's naive. We didn't make them take it. I even made a PSA about drug use back in 2022.
Passionate, I have a real question, and I'm hoping that one of you will be able to give me a real answer. It's going to sound a little bit, I don't know how it's going to sound, but I really need an answer on this. Why are people still deciding to start smoking crack in 2022? Like, if this was 1982 or even 1992, but it's 2022. Like, at what conversation are you having with yourself or with somebody else? Or like what conversation has your relative or that person down the block that you know that that abuses drugs? What was the conversation that they had with themselves that they said, you know what? It's the year 2000, and for 20 years, they've been campaigning against crack, and I've seen the effects of crack on individuals. I've seen the effects of crack on communities. I've seen the effects of crack on families. But I think I might be the exception. I think I want to start smoking some. Like what? Like, does anybody have an answer for that? I'm not trying to be funny. I'm really just trying to get an answer because it's 2022. Like, crack ain't never been what's up. So why are people out here saying to themselves, you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to smoke crack. Let me know. Drop a comment below if you have an answer. Because I'd love to know. Please and thank you.
40 years of examples as to why nobody should still be using crack, and yet people are taking their first hit 2 decades into the new millennium. I legit wanted to understand why, so I can be a little bit more empathetic, because crack? For real? Like, I personally think that's a wild substance to want to explore for leisure or otherwise, but far be it from me to judge the next person's experience. Also, someone gave me some good feedback to think about. The link to that post is in the description box if you want to view it again or read the comments. Point is, I just thought about how callous and casual we are when we speak and with no regard for what we're saying, and how it can be triggering, traumatizing, or re-traumatizing for someone that we care about. And sure, somebody's laughing saying, I have that relative, and I laugh at they dope fiend behind too. It is what it is. But there's also someone who's either gone quiet in the conversation, or they're faking and feigning being okay with what's being said, but silently they're wrestling with, that's my mom they're talking about. That's what's happening with my kid. Because none of us really care about the personhood of the people we mock. Not until they belong to someone we care about, or they are someone we care about, right? We talked about that in episode 7. Because they're mine, then it's not funny. It's sad. But what do we say then? We all belong to someone, because everybody is somebody's daughter or son. Every drug addict, every substance abuser, every ancient individual is somebody's somebody. But that doesn't matter to us until they're ours and they mean something to us. Because if they're ours, but our trauma is more favorable or our issues aren't as visible, we'll still diminish or denigrate them because we're not doing as bad. But the joke is, half of us are doing just as bad. Our addictions are celebrated and promoted. Y'all are okay with being mean and hateful and curt and rude when you haven't had your coffee? Some of you can't get right until you've had at least 16 ounces. And if you can't have it for a couple days, you're a nightmare to deal with. Friend, caffeine is a drug. That makes you a drug addict. You ever seen someone who heavily smokes have to go longer than like what they're used to without a cigarette? I had an employee who pleaded with me for a cigarette break because she needed a cigarette that bad. And the only reason she hadn't had a break was because the store was busy and the lines were wild long. Her hands were shaking like this and she was starting to sweat. Nicotine is a drug. Enough time without a cigarette and she started going through withdrawal. And that enough time qualifier wasn't really that long. It may have been a couple hours max. We're talking about like maybe 2. And then there's a global addiction that just about everybody wrestles with, right? Sugar. Y'all know I do the Daniel fast at some point every year. Usually when I do this fast around people who aren't familiar with it, they're curious. How long is it? What can you have? I tell them. Oh, so it's being vegan. No. Amongst other things that are on the do not consume list, vegans can have alcohol, caffeine, yeast, and sweeteners. I just said you can't have any of that. Alcohol, that's 50-50 on how hard that is to give up for 21 days. Caffeine, bread, and sugar? I might as well have told them to unalive themselves. Immediately, the negotiations began. I can't have any caffeine, but I need my coffee. I can't function without it. You literally can. One woolly for y'all never had coffee until you were teenagers. And some of y'all never had it until you were adults. Now you can't function without something you literally did without for the first 20 years of your life. But you're in position to laugh at someone else's addiction, right? You can't have any added sugars. First question, well, what about honey? Honey's not a sweetener. Okay. I challenge everybody watching this right now. Go list all the things you specifically use honey for in the comments. Don't go Googling usage so you could tell me about the antibacterial and skin softening properties, okay? If you don't take milk and honey baths and you don't use honey as part of your wound care, The main, if not only thing you use honey for is to sweeten. No added sweeteners and no animal products. Honey gets X twice. So can you use coconut sugar or date sugar? Those are from fruits. No added sweeteners. And there are 3 responses. Nah, I can't do it. This fast is too hard. I'd rather not eat all day than have to deal with those restrictions. 2, you have the group that boldly says, I could do it. Then they proceed to eat everything they've been eating because it doesn't taste sweet. Every cereal on the market, with the exception of muesli, has added sugar, including bland, tasteless cornflakes. No added sweeteners doesn't mean no desserts. It means exactly what was said. The average person reads the front of the package and keeps it moving. There are many who read ingredients, but they're not necessarily in the majority. And most of the ones who read the ingredients, well, they just bypass whatever they don't understand or can't pronounce. We could do a whole episode on the foods we eat and their impact. We had a guest to discuss this topic, and I think that was season 3. And at some point, we'll revisit it because it is important. But for today, let's just focus on the matter at hand. Half the world is addicted to sugar. We can't mock diabetics who have type 2 diabetes. We can't mock people who are overweight due to direct or indirect sugar addictions, right? The junk food junkies, the people who can't go a day without rice, the ones who think it's unheard of to not eat bread. It's fat shaming when you mock people who fall into those categories, and it's body negativity, right? Because there are other issues and contributing factors, right? And not everybody this, and some people that, and some are doing everything they can, but they can't help whatever, right? But is that not the same thing for the substance abusers? Not all of them this, some of them actually that. And some are really doing everything they can, but they can't help whatever. Passioners, this is not an episode about addiction, although it may seem that way. This is judge not lest ye be judged first. This is let he who is without sin cast the first stone. This is another take on what we previously discussed. People are not more valid or more deserving of protection simply because they're yours. Also, feelings are not more valid because they're yours. The person you're laughing at today could be you tomorrow. The affliction or side effects thereof are the subject of your mockery today. It would hurt your feelings and probably perpetuate you continuing the behavior and by default, continue the behavioral side effects of whatever you're using or abusing. And none of us wants to believe that could ever be our story, right? But how many people do you know that have had or currently have issues with substance abuse aspire to be abusers or addicts? How many people do you know, or of the documentaries and the biopics and reality shows that you've seen, how many people have you ever heard say, yeah, when I was younger, I always wanted to be an addict, a junkie, a druggie, a user? Episode 1 of this season, we talked about Cat Williams' interview on Club Shay Shay, where he talked about his time living on the streets at a young age. He talked about all those people who had it all, lost it all to addiction, and were now also living on the streets. Which one of them you think feels good about being laughed at or called names? You ever see that interview with that couple who was on drugs? I think they were both on meth. And they were living in the throes of destitution. Both of them looked unwashed, gaunt. Their mattress was dirty. And they both said at that point, they weren't even using to get high or for pleasure. They were using because they were in physical pain because of their body's physical dependency. Y'all remember that? I don't know, Passionate, but it gets less and less funny the more we actually think about it. And the more you think about it is the more, I would imagine, you would not want to liken yourself to any of the behaviors, no? Passion. OMG, everything is not that deep. You got to learn how to take a joke. It's not that serious. Gosh. Until it is. And full circle, that's usually when it's you or yours being highlighted, spotlighted, mocked, criticized, and then it's not funny anymore. But is that because it's you or yours, or because the experience now has validity when you're living through it? Because you know how so many folks like to invalidate other people's lived experience since it hasn't happened to them, or it hasn't happened to them on the same scale. Well, Passion, you mentioned before that there are people who are related to substance abusers, and it don't bother them to hear these people being called names like junkie or crackhead because that's what they are. So I still think you're making way more of it than you need to. You know that people express different emotions in different ways. Someone right now is calling their mom a dope fiend, not because it's funny, but because they're frustrated. They're lashing out. Someone else is balking on their uncle and calling them all kinds of different versions of crackhead because they're angry. Again, they're lashing out. Some people laugh to keep from crying. Not everyone knows how to say, this behavior disappoints me, and it makes me sad that you started down this road, especially knowing that the only way you'll get off and stay off this path is when it's what you want to do. Recognizing that you're at the place where the siren song of this drug is a sweeter lullaby than anything we're talking about is heartbreaking and enraging. Not everyone knows how to say it diplomatically. And frankly, some don't want to be diplomatic. They want to be callous because of how they feel. And that's a real thing. But that's their story. Why are you so pressed to be justified in identifying somebody by their addiction or predilection? And why are you so comfortable likening your behaviors to theirs? And is it still funny if the person next to you says, yeah, you were nodding off, but it's nothing like being addicted to heroin? The high is what it is, but the fight to let it go is hard won. Is it still funny if the person next to you bursts into tears because they're triggered because they were that crackhead? Hearing people talk about you while under the influence of something, and hearing people talk about you when you're of clear and sound mind can be very, very different experiences. Here's some more food for thought. Somebody right now is not being forthcoming with you about what they wrestle with, what they're addicted to, what they're infected with, what they're afflicted by, because they hear how you talk about people with these issues. They listen and they make mental notes about what they can or should confide in you, if anything. Some of them make decisions not to be honest with you. Some of them make decisions not to be honest with anybody. Remember that next time you do feel some sense of compassion for someone when you find out that they're in dire straits and you say, how did it get this bad? When did this happen? Why didn't you ever say something? Why didn't you talk to me? I would have helped you. Why would they confess to someone that they're the fiend or any other unkind adjective that you loosely throw around? Why would they talk to you? They down bad based on how you talk about people who are also down. Well, you'd have them down worse. I mean, that's how it seems. It's easier to get high and to try to escape the discontent than it is to face and fix what's causing it. Kind of like it's easier to say, I make everything deeper than it really is than to just be mindful of what you're saying and why, right? Passion is, as much as I didn't want to make this an episode about addiction, the nerd in me could not let this just be an op-ed. So down the rabbit hole I fell, and I'm finna drag y'all into it real quick too so that you can have a better understanding about addiction. Am I trying to make you more empathetic? No. Be as mean and as thoughtless as you want to be. Go get I didn't mean it like that tattooed on your forehead since that's your mantra. But with that, also be reminded that you're supposed to treat people how you want to be treated. So should you ever find yourself wrestling with something for which you would not want to be mocked, you would be hard-pressed to find the same empathy you were hard-pressed to extend. Also, when you're being mean or just making an off-color joke, at someone else's expense. With these tidbits of knowledge, you can never say you didn't know. At the point you choose to be, do, or say, you're doing it by choice, not by unawareness. Let your character speak its truth. So I sourced 3 different articles, right? And the overlaps in opinion for all of the articles say that addiction is a chronic condition or disease changing brain structure and function. It's fueled by a loss of control over the use of a substance and swaps the everyday desires of the brain with those of the drug or behavior you're addicted to. It doesn't happen from having a lack of willpower or as a result of making bad decisions. Your brain chemistry changes with addiction. Now, according to a blog post on health.harvard.edu, clinicians and scientists alike now think that many people engage in psychoactive experiences to escape physical and emotional discomfort, and that the roots of addiction reside in activities associated with sensation seeking and self-medication. Now, like I said previously, which is how we ended up in this rabbit hole, they said people allude to addiction in everyday conversation, casually referring to themselves as chocolate addicts or workaholics, dope fiend nodding. However, addiction is not a term clinicians take lightly. Addiction involves compulsive seeking and taking of a substance or performing of an activity despite negative or harmful consequences. You no longer enjoy what other people do as the brain changes. The changes start with recognition of pleasure and end with a drive toward compulsive behavior to fulfill that desire. Sometimes when you try quitting, the addiction weakens your ability to manage impulses. Some people develop unpleasant and sometimes dangerous physical symptoms when they stop or decrease substance use. These changes result in a weakened ability to control impulses despite the negative consequences. Stress, anxiety, trauma, depression, and other mental health illnesses can also result in the development of substance use disorders. So how does this happen? Humans are biologically motivated to seek rewards. Your body releases a chemical called dopamine, which makes you feel pleasure. Substances send massive surges of dopamine through your brain, and instead of motivating you to do the things you need to do to survive, such massive dopamine levels can have damaging effects on your thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and create an unhealthy drive to seek more pleasure from the substance or activity and less from healthier activities. Over time, the substances or activities change your brain chemistry and you become desensitized to their effects. You then need more to produce the same effect. The difference comes in the speed, intensity, and reliability with which the brain releases dopamine. Typically, drugs of abuse stimulate a high dopamine surge. That's why they'll always be so addictive. The high levels create an alternative route to the brain's reward system, which causes dopamine to flood the brain and ultimately intensifies addiction. Until recently, scientists thought the only cause of addiction was pleasure, but recent studies show that dopamine affects the brain's learning process and the ability to retain things in memory. Dopamine takes over the control of the brain's reward learning process when it interacts with glutamate, like dopamine, another neurotransmitter. This learning process is essential to encouraging necessary body activities. Again, since the brain's reward circuit includes the parts that boost motivation, dopamine does the same, but with an overload of motivation. Continued consumption of the drugs causes the brain to stimulate the body into a deep desire to consume more drugs. With time, the brain gets used to the substances, which translates to less pleasure. Naturally, we know pleasure comes after some hard work, but these drugs overwhelm the brain, and in turn, the brain either releases less dopamine or gets rid of its receptors. That means that dopamine's effect on the reward center reduces significantly. So even if you were addicted, you no longer experience the pleasure you were used to. And that can drive someone to consume even more quantities to reach the dopamine high levels that can cause significant pleasure. Even if you hardly experience pleasure from drugs, the memory created from past use compels the desire to recreate that pleasure. This compulsion causes part of your brain, the hippocampus and amygdala, to start developing thoughts about getting the drug again, which grows into intense desire when encountering an environment with those drugs. Another overlap in opinions are the factors that contribute to the development of addictions, like genetics, mental health, and environmental factors like access, usage by people around you, traumatic life events, and adverse childhood experiences. The general consensus is that there are two main types of addiction, right? Substance addictions or substance use disorders, which includes things like alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, hypnotic sedatives and anxiolytics, inhalants, prescription and non-prescription opioids, prescription and non-prescription stimulants, and tobacco and nicotine. All of these strongly activate the reward center of your brain and produce feelings of pleasure. Now, here's a quick screenshot of the non-substance addictions or the behavioral addictions. The article goes on to say for non-substance addictions, i.e. behavioral addictions, they can occur with any activity that's capable of stimulating your brain's reward system and consist of any activity or habit that becomes all-consuming and negatively impacts your daily functioning. And they can cause significant mental, social, and physical health issues, as well as financial issues in some cases. The Harvard blog post differs slightly, saying addiction experts are beginning to move away from the notion that there are multiple addictions, each tied to a specific substance or activity. Rather, the syndrome model of addiction suggests that there's one addiction that is associated with multiple expressions. An object of addiction can be almost anything. Okay, so what are the signs of addiction? Well, signs of addiction generally include inability to stop, increased tolerance, intense focus on the substance or activity, lack of control, personal problems and health issues, and withdrawal. And while this is complicated enough, there's the conflict of managing and treating coexisting and co-occurring conditions. According to R. Catherine McHugh, Ph.D., Chief of Psychology at McLean Hospital, the traditional care model for co-occurring disorders is perhaps the biggest hurdle to effective treatment. Historically, mental health and substance use treatments are handled separately by different specialists, each focusing on one area and not always having knowledge about both. This immediately puts patients at a disadvantage. It can be inefficient and inconvenient. More importantly, the patient gets care for addiction and the coexisting conditions at separate times. The gold standard is to take care of them at the same time. Often, mental health providers suggest that patients get sober first and then come back to get their other mental health conditions treated. That isn't a good idea. Those people often don't come back, says McHugh. They struggle to achieve any extended sobriety and or their overall condition worsens because their mood or anxiety disorder isn't being treated. Aside from helping to ensure that patients get care for all of their conditions, there's another compelling reason to get concurrent and integrated care: complexity. The treatment facilities that do this really well are those that treat all of a patient's conditions at the same time and in the same place, preferably with the same provider or team of providers, says McHugh. This is ideal because it's impossible for us to pull out one disorder, pull out the other one, and treat them as two distinct entities, because they never are. There's a lot of overlap and a lot of intersection between symptoms. Co-occurring disorders can also feed off each other. McHugh explains that when the symptoms of one condition improve, the symptoms of the other or others often worsen. For some people, it can almost feel like whack-a-mole. You get one thing under control and the other pops back up. If someone's drinking, that can mask the anxiety. But if you stop drinking, the anxiety comes back up. That's why it's so hard to treat one and then the other. So yeah, remember what I said about people not being open or honest about what they're navigating because of how you've mocked people with similar or the same issues? Look at these numbers. Alcohol use disorder is the most common substance addiction in the U.S., followed by nicotine and marijuana. About 10% of people aged 12 or older, have alcohol use disorder. In 2011, SAMHSA reported that an estimated 22.1 million persons, or 8.9% of the U.S. population aged 12 or older, would meet the diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder. SAMHSA broke down the percentage of users who will develop dependence on particular drugs: 8 to 9% of marijuana users, 12 to 13% of alcohol users, 15 to 16% of cocaine users, 67% of nicotine users. Among adults aged 18 or older in 2021, now this is from a different article and 10 years from the previous stats, right? 32.5% of adults had either a substance use disorder or other type of mental illness. 9.7% of adults specifically had a substance use disorder but no other type of mental illness. 7.6% of adults had both a substance use disorder and at least one other type of mental illness. Also, always remember that statistics only include those who've been documented and counted. Plenty enough people that are in this struggle are unaccounted for. The family knows about it, but the statisticians don't. So the numbers are skewed. I think the fact that liquor stores were considered an essential service when the world closed very much confirms that. One whole heap of people can't function or self-regulate without a couple of puffs of something. But they'll never call themselves addicts. They can't function without it, but they're not addicted. So the sources included in this particular episode were Cleveland Clinic, McLean Hospital, and harvardhealth.edu. Special thank you to these sources for the information that they provided. There's so much more included, but in the interest of time and getting back on topic, I'm not going to go further, even though I went pretty far. Anyway, I do encourage you to take a look at these articles if you'd like more information or want to see more statistics, because some of these numbers are definitely staggering and disheartening. And more than that, it gives a great picture of how many people are potentially navigating these issues. Potentially because not everyone is being counted, and because sometimes organizations pad numbers to get the funding they're looking for, and sometimes numbers are inflated to invoke fear. That's another conversation for another time. But assuming these numbers are more accurate than they're not, the numbers are high. So if we're looking at 1 out of every 2, 1 in 4, even 1 in 10, look left, look right, someone on either side of you is dealing with it one way or another while you make mockery of it. Or you're the one being mocked. Don't change because I made you feel guilty. Just be okay with it when you're the butt of the joke. And be okay with being the butt of the joke while someone else isn't okay with it. Because your feelings aren't the measure of whether it's actually funny or okay. Or be more cognizant of what's coming out your mouth and the reality that maybe it's not landing the way it's intended because it's a trigger or a sore spot. It's your choice. I'm just making sure you have the other perspective. Agree or disagree, your feedback is welcome. Drop some megaphones or any other kind of feedback in the comments. Send me a listener letter to greetings@whatonewomandoes.com. If you'd like to be a financial contributor, links to the PayPal, Podbean, Linktree, and Zelle are all in the description box. Donations are appreciated and exclusively go to supporting the pod. I said all I needed to say, which was quite a bit. You Get You Right Guru. You Get You Right Guru is signing off. Y'all go forth, be great, be filled with bliss, be armed and empowered with knowledge. Choose your words wisely. Do your best to ensure your intended message and your received message are a match. Be as careful with other people's feelings as you are with yours. And in all things, be passionate. See you later.